Good evening all, Prynhawn da, croeso. Welcome to Cavan Cymru for the first session for English Literature. So today's session will be run by Ms Yvonne Thomas from Ysgol Greenhill School in Tenby. The session will last around 45 minutes where the teacher will go through we'll be looking at the extract question from Unit 1, focusing mainly on Of Mice and Men, but obviously the subject content is obviously transferable skills. If during this session you have any questions, please make sure you use the question answer section and we will try and answer any questions during that session. This will be recorded and the recording and any resources will be uploaded to the eSchool website in the Caerlon Cymru area. I will now hand you over to Ms Yvonne Thomas. If you need any help, like I said, please use the Q&A section. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's, as Miss Davis has already said, is Miss Thomas and I'll be presenting the lesson today. We've also got Miss Davis available during the lesson to answer any questions you might have through the session. So as she's already said, please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask questions. Again, I'm kind of repeating her, but the session's 45 minutes long. It'll be recorded so you can go back and watch the lesson again if need be. So our focus today, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to understand what skills are required to respond to an extract question in the Unit 1 and 2 GCSE English Literature papers. I think Miss Davis did mention there that although I'll be focusing on a Unit 1 question, the skills are transferable into Unit 2 as well. You should be able to understand the mark scheme for an extract question. So we'll have I'll talk you through some of the mark scheme and make sure you understand that. And you'll be able to use a structure to respond to an extract question. So I'll be providing you with a structure. Obviously your teachers in your class may give you a different structure, but this is a structure I use with my Year 11 students. Okay, so what is an extract question? So in the Unit 1 GCSE English Literature assessment, you're required to complete an essay and an extract question on Of Mice and Men. In the Unit 2 question, although I haven't put that in there, you will have 2 texts that you'll have to focus on, and both of those texts have an extract question and an essay question as well. So the extract question is an analysis of an extract from the book, and it focuses on the language used to either describe a character or to describe the mood and atmosphere created by the author. Now, due to time constraints this evening, I will be focusing on the character question today because unfortunately, you know, there isn't enough time to go through mood and atmosphere as well. And just for you to be aware, the extract question is worth 10 marks on the paper. Okay. So I've just popped on here a screen print of the mark scheme. So there are 2 sections to the mark scheme. There's AO1, Assessment Objective 1, which is a critical response to the text. So that focuses on whether or not you are able to pick out the details from the text. So select relevant quotations and be able to make judgments about the characters or the relationships or perhaps the mood and atmosphere, and be able to handle those texts with confidence. So it is in a banding. So the bands are 0 to 4, sorry, 0 to 5, I think they are, and basically you will have to the marks will be based on whatever the response that you provide. They will look at it and decide which band you sit in. So obviously the higher the mark, the higher the band, the higher the band rather, the higher the mark. I've got that the wrong way around there. So you should be able to handle that text, that extract question with confidence, be able to select evidence from the text which is relevant to the question, and you should be able to explain your ideas. So that would give you the basics of the band 1, of the AO1 assessment objective. The second assessment objective is language, structure and form. So this focuses more on the language, analysing the language and perhaps the techniques that the author may use. Okay, so you have to comment on how the meanings and ideas are conveyed through that language. Okay, at the highest level, if you look at the bottom there, it says that you make assured analysis of stylistic features. So are you able to pick out the techniques, okay, from the extract, and are you able to explain them, what effects they have on the reader? That's the most important thing. So how does that writer create effects in that text? Okay, in this question, you do not refer to context at all. So in the extract question, there's no focus on context. You save that for the essay. You don't tell the story, okay? If you do tell the story, there's no need to do that because the examiner is aware of what happens in the story. You're focusing on that extract. So you're analysing the text on the page. As I've said there, you can refer to the techniques the writer uses, but only if you can comment on their effect. There is no point in just saying the author uses a simile. You need to say what effect that has on the reader. So perhaps, you know, the effect of that is it helps the reader imagine what this character is like. So you need to be able to show the effect of that technique on the reader. You should always comment on the language or the words. The term I use is comment on words. This means that you will hit the assessment objective 2, which is the language. So the ideas conveyed through language. So as long as you focus on the words that the author uses, you should be able to hit that criteria. Okay, so this is the advice from the exam board, WJC, to approaching the extract question. You need to always check the focus of the question and underline any keywords and phrases that support the points you want to make. So consider why this particular extract has been chosen. For example, is it a turning point in the story? Does it reveal something new about a character? Okay, you can refer to the extract and say where it occurs in the story, but there's really no need to do that if you know you're short of time, because that's the key thing, making sure that you have enough time to complete all the questions. You need to make sure that you're specific in your response. So for example, if the question asks how the writer creates mood and atmosphere, then you need to refer to the mood and atmosphere throughout your response. So a good way to do that is to use the question in your response. So I will show you examples of that in a moment. Okay, the whole of the extract should be considered. There'll be a good reason why it begins and ends where it does. If there are any stage directions, which is particularly relevant in Unit 2, because you have to study a play, then they should be analysed as closely as the characters' dialogue and actions, because it may tell you specific things about characters, or they may tell you specific things about mood and atmosphere. So it's really important that you consider those things as well when you're analysing the extract. Relevant brief reference may be made to other parts of the text to put the extract in context, as I mentioned, but the extract provided should always be the main concern. So you could say something like, this extract occurs at the beginning of the novel when George first meets Candy, for example. Okay, so that kind of sets the context, but it's very brief. You don't really want to extend that any more than it needs to be. You should avoid being general, and you always need to support what you say with reference to the text of the extract. Okay, so make sure that you're picking evidence from the text and you're explaining that thoroughly in relation to the question. So here we go. So characteristics of a successful extract response. So this is kind of a sum up of the response that WJEC have given before when they have when they've done an examination review. So they provide teachers with specific areas of focus, what's been very good about the question, how students have been successful in it, and how students have been less successful. So successful extract responses, there's a clear and sustained focus on the specific extract, and they don't mention context of the novel or storylines. So they're focusing completely on that extract. There's a selection of short apt references to support points made. So the quotations that are chosen are very short and to the point. There's no need to choose a long quotation. There's a clear grasp of subtext, so what's really going on in the extract. So it's not just a surface understanding of what particular language points mean, but it's the deeper meaning. What does the author actually mean? You know, what is he trying to convey to the reader? Characteristics of a less successful extract response then: no clear knowledge of the assessment objectives being assessed. So, you know, there's no understanding of what's required from the mark scheme. So they may, you know, misunderstand the question, or they pick out points which are just not relevant. Limited coverage of the extract. So that's quite an important point, that you cover the extract from start to finish. Okay, it needs to be covered in full. A lack of relevant supporting references. So there's a lack of evidence being chosen to support the points that are being made, and a reliance on general impressions. So, you know, you need to be really specific about the point that you're making. Okay, so we're going to move on. So one of the useful skills needed for an extract question, I thought I would just go through this quite quickly, but one of the important skills that you need are inference skills, which are, you know, the act of process of reaching a conclusion about something from known facts. So inference skills are when you are given information or you're told information in a text, but you have to kind of make your own decision about it. You have to kind of guess what the author's trying to tell you based on the information that you've been given. So I've just put a little point in there of why we need inference skills. So they're an essential skill to help us understand the world in which we live. We make inferences all of the time. So every day, you know, you make an inference without even realizing it. So if you, for example, if you meet someone for the first time, you might make an inference about what they're wearing, okay, and you might make a judgment based on how they look. Okay, so if someone turns up at the front of your house in a Rolls Royce, the inference that you'd perhaps make is that that person has lots of money. Okay, so you make these inferences all the time. It's just like first impressions. So as good readers, we make inferences all the time as well. So inference is fundamental to understanding the true meaning of a text. So it's that subtext, that text below, you know, the obvious things that the author's telling us. It's that understanding of the true meaning of the text. So we're going to have a quick go at this. Miss Davis, if you could tell me if they're posting any answers on the Q&A. I just want you to think about what these words suggest about the characters. There's two characters here, okay? So what might the words "they whispered" indicate about two characters? Just let me know, Miss Davis, if we get any responses. Okay, and have a think about the second part, "as my cheeks went red." What could that imply about the character? I'll give you a minute to try and respond to that.
Nothing yet, Mrs. Thomas.
Okay. Okay, shall I just go through that myself then?
Yeah, that would be an idea, I think, yes.
Yeah, okay, so the fact that they whispered perhaps suggests that they're being secretive, okay? The author isn't saying this couple are talking to each other secretively. You know, he's implying that they're whispering, okay, which perhaps they're sharing a secret, or they may be talking about someone else. So I've put there, so this hints that the character's secretive about something. And as my cheeks went red, it could imply that the person is perhaps embarrassed. They might be hot, okay? But if someone's whispering, they you know, it perhaps implies that they might be embarrassed. Okay, so this is just a little there, but if you kind of get the understanding that sometimes the author, it's the show not tell technique, where they'll show you or they'll describe what the character's doing, but they won't tell you. So that author could have written, the characters were whispering to each other and the lady was embarrassed. But they're trying to get you to make your own judgment of what they're doing. So I've got another one here. So what impression of Mandalay do you get from this quotation? So peering closer through the rusted spokes of the gate. Okay, what perhaps could that tell us about this particular house and the gate leading to the house? So perhaps tells us maybe that the gate's quite old, that it's been damaged by rain. Perhaps it's not been used very much because it's all rusted. So if something's rusted, it's been perhaps sitting there for a long time without any care taken of it and without, you know, it being used. So does it perhaps imply that that house might have been empty for some time? Okay, so there's several different inferences we can make about a piece of text. Okay, I've got a final one here. So Scrooge smiled as he closed the door on the last guest to leave the party. So this is from A Christmas Carol. Okay, so the fact that Scrooge smiled suggests to me that he's happy that the last guests have left the party. So looking a little bit more deeply, why would he be happy? Why would he want the guests to leave? Well, perhaps because he likes to be on his own. He doesn't want to be in company of other people. Okay, so we get the impression that Scrooge liked to be alone, okay, because he's happy that people have left the party. So hopefully that'll give you some idea of using your inference skills and how authors perhaps use text and, you know, use their writing to help us as readers to understand a text and make first impressions of characters and settings without actually telling us. They just show us by using specific vocabulary. Okay, so here these the extract question strategy that I use when I'm teaching extract questions. So I always ask my students to highlight and annotate the question. And I do that because I want them to know what they're looking for in the extract. So is it related to character or mood and atmosphere? And I think sometimes this is where students can trip themselves up because they'll not read the question properly and they'll start analysing the extract perhaps about a character. They'll start writing about a character in the extract, but actually the question is about mood and atmosphere. So you need to be really careful with that. So I would then ask them to highlight, number and annotate at least 6 quotations in the extract that answer the question. There's no point in highlighting without annotating, as it will not help you to write a response. So when you highlight, and I will show you an example of this in a moment, you need to think about why you're highlighting it and make a note of how it relates to the question. So it might be you highlight a particular phrase, and you'll say this is a tense atmosphere or a tense mood. Okay, so you know that when you start writing up your response, you can quickly go back and pick out the relevant parts that you want to write about without having to think as much again. So that first and second reading of the extract is really important to pick out that evidence. So you need to write at least 6 detailed evidence suggest comments on word and mini paragraphs. I would normally suggest 6 or 7 quotations. You don't need 10. It's a 10-mark question, but I would steer away from completing 10 because you will probably run out of time and they won't be as detailed. So I would always go for about 6 or 7. That's what I would recommend. And you need to track through the whole extract, as I've said before. Okay, so here is an example. So I'm going to take you through a section of an extract from Of Mice and Men and show you how to annotate. Remember, you only have to write about 6 to 7 detailed points. Okay, so highlight and annotating the question. So this is a question that I'm going to focus on. So what do you think of the way George and Lenny speak and behave here? Give reasons for what you say and remember to support your answer with words and phrases from the extract. So I've highlighted my question there and I've reworded things. So how did George and Lenny act? What does it tell us about them? So the way George and Lenny So what do George and Lenny say? What does it tell us about them? So the speak, we're looking at what they say to each other, and the behave, we're looking at how they act. Okay, so give reasons for what you say. So why, from what you've picked out in terms of evidence, why do you think this? And in using evidence quotations from the text to support your points of view. There's our question. So then this is the first section of that text. I'm going to go through this in a bit of detail now. So the first thing I've highlighted is this, okay? If you want to respond to what you think this means, you can do, but I will carry on talking. If as we go along you want to respond, then Miss Davis will pick up those questions from you. Okay, so my focus is thinking about what the author is saying about the characters of George and Lenny. Okay, so the first thing I've picked out is that first line. So Lenny lumbered to his feet and disappeared in the brush. So to me, that implies that Lenny is clumsy and childlike, because it takes him a little bit a while to get up to his feet, and then he disappears in the brush. So he's like a child, you know, he's rushing out to the brush. Okay, the next one I've picked out is this one. So George lay where he was and whistled softly to himself. So the impression that gives me is that George is quite relaxed. You know, he's lying down, he's not concerned about what Lenny's doing. He's lying there quietly and whistling softly to himself. So he seems quite laid back and relaxed. Okay, next one then. He says, "Poor bastard," he said softly. Okay, so that is, he's cursing him, isn't he? He's using a swear word, isn't he, to say something about him. But the key word in that phrase is softly. So to me, that implies that he feels sorry for Lenny. You know, he's calling him, you know, he's using the word poor as well with that swear word. So he's saying that he feels sorry for Lenny, and he uses that adverb softly because that's the way he's saying it. Okay, and then the next one then, George sat up. "All right," he said brusquely, "give me that mouse." Okay, so his tone changes here. If you look at the first part where he's talked about Lenny and he said something softly, he now speaks brusquely, which is quite abrupt. So it's almost like he sits up, you know, in response to Lenny's return, and he asks him quite sternly and abruptly to give him the mouse. Okay, so it perhaps shows a change in George's character, that he's now less relaxed, and he you know, he's sitting up to attention to see what Lenny's been getting up to. Okay, so Lenny made an elaborate pantomime of innocence. Okay, so what I've said here is that the impression I get of Lenny here is he's making a pantomime of innocence. So he's not just showing his innocence, he's making a pantomime. He's denying all knowledge of having this mouse. So George asks him to give him this mouse, and Lenny acts up and, you know, perhaps plays George a little bit. You know, it's not just a pantomime of innocence where he's acting, it's elaborate, so it's over the top. You know, he's making this big act of how innocent he is, which is quite childlike in some ways, you know, so perhaps reiterating the fact that at the beginning we said he was childlike. Again, you know, he's showing the fact that he's done nothing wrong, which as a child, you know, if you observe, well, probably you've all done it when you were younger, you know, if your parent accuses you of something, you often deny all knowledge of it. So it perhaps shows that Lenny knows how to play George and you know, maybe try and make him, well, he thinks he'll be able to convince him that he hasn't got anything, he's not hiding anything. Okay, so next one, "Come on, give it to me, you ain't putting nothing over." So George, the impression I get of George here is that actually, you know, he uses quite short sentences here. He's in charge. "Come on, give it to me." So he's in charge of Lenny. You know, he's more dominant, and he makes it clear to Lenny that he's not being fooled by his acting. So I've put there, so George knows Lenny very well. He knows when he's being fooled. So this is a thing that's obviously he's experienced before, where Lenny has tried to hide things from him before. So now he understands the way that Lenny works, and he won't take this act that he's putting on. Okay, so George said coldly, "You're going to give me that mouse, or do I have to sock you?" So again, Steinbeck uses adverbs again to describe how George speaks to Lenny. So he says this coldly. Okay, so we've gone from softly to brusquely to now coldly. So he's quite harsh with Lenny here. You know, you're going to give me that mouse, or do I have to sock you? So we ascertain certain things about their relationship here. So one of the things I've thought about as I've been reading through this is the fact that George is almost paternal towards Lenny. You know, he's telling him off. He's he's threatening him now, saying that he's being quite tough with him. Okay, so he threatens him with violence. He says, "Oh, do I have to sock you?" Which means, do I have to hit you? Okay, and it's almost a contrast to the earlier part of the extract where he was being quite soft with Lenny. You know, and he felt sorry for him, but now that's suddenly changed. Okay, so this is the way I would always set up or you know, suggest that people structure their response. So it's that evidence suggests. So I'd always take evidence from the text. I would comment on words. I would then comment on words again, just to make sure that I am drilling down on the language that the author uses, okay, and making sure that the examiner is aware that I'm hitting that assessment objective. Okay, so the AO2, the assessment objective 2, just to understand that I am hitting that, I make sure that I comment on words twice. And then I'm going to add a little bit at the end, which focuses on the relationship between those two characters. Okay, so perhaps to tell the examiner a little bit more so that I understand what this friendship and this relationship is like between them. So here's my example then. So firstly, Steinbeck writes, "Poor bastard," he said softly, which suggests that George feels sorry for Lenny. The word poor, so that I'm commenting on the word from the original evidence that I took. The word poor implies George's sympathy for the less mentally able Lenny. Okay, additionally, I'm using my connective again to add on further. Additionally, the word softly refers to the tone of George's speech, perhaps reinforces his love for his friend. So the fact that he's saying this in a soft manner helps us to understand that he does feel sorry for Lenny, you know, and he feels that perhaps you know, he has this connection with him and this friendship, so he does care about him. This is an important part of the story, as it emphasises the strength of George and Lenny's friendship. So I've got that little bit at the end where I'm focusing on their relationship, and I'm able to tell the examiner that I understand what kind of relationship they have. Okay, so just going back then to this section, because I have, you know, I have gone through that quite quickly. Are there any questions, Miss Davies, that have come up whilst I've been speaking?
No, none whatsoever.
Okay, and how many participants do we have in the?
3.
3. Okay, right. So perhaps what I'll do is I'll go through a little bit of mood and atmosphere then. So thinking about the mood and atmosphere that's created in this extract. Okay, so when we first meet Lenny at the beginning of this extract, and George is relaxed, we talked about that. So perhaps you could say that the mood and atmosphere is quite a relaxed mood and atmosphere. George is relaxed. He's not worried about Lenny. Okay, he doesn't concern himself with where Lenny's going. Okay, he hears sounds then of splashing down the river in the direction Lenny had taken, and he stops whistling and listened. So perhaps that atmosphere, there's a bit of a change in atmosphere then. He becomes a little bit, perhaps on edge, a little bit anxious, because he's wondering then what Lenny's doing. You know, he's off in the brush by himself. So he knows that he's not an independent person. You know, George tends to look after Lenny all the time, so he's not very independent, and he worries then about where he's gone. Okay, but then the atmosphere changes again. So poor bastard, he said softly, and then went on whistling again. Okay, so again, that it changes again to this relaxed atmosphere. And this is one of the things that you'll come across if you're doing a mood and atmosphere question. Often the exam board will choose an extract where the atmosphere or the mood changes throughout it. So you might move from one mood and atmosphere to another, okay, or there might be a part in the middle where the mood and atmosphere changes completely. So you need to be aware of that. They will have picked specific extracts for a reason. Okay, so in a moment, Lenny came crashing back through the brush. He carried one small willow stick in his hand. George sat up. All right, he said brusquely, give me that mouse. So the atmosphere immediately changes. Okay, George immediately becomes a little bit more abrupt and less relaxed. So there's that anticipation, you know, an atmosphere of anticipation as he waits for Lenny to respond to his answer. You know, it's that building of anger, I suppose, and building of tension. Okay, but Lenny made an elaborate pantomime of innocence. What mouse, George? I ain't got no mouse. Okay, so the atmosphere here is one of, I suppose, denial. You know, Lenny denies all knowledge of this this mouse. So he kind of reacts to George's anger, really, and, you know, tries to put on a pantomime of innocence, you know, an atmosphere then of being innocent. Okay, and then we start to see the anger rise in George. So you ain't putting nothing over. So he's becoming more angry. So the atmosphere then changes to an angry atmosphere. Okay, and then we see another change in atmosphere with Lenny. So whereas he's been quite confident, you know, and he's put on this act of being innocent, he now suddenly he gets quite scared. You know, so this atmosphere of a mood of perhaps hesitation, and, you know, he backs away. He's an atmosphere perhaps of desperation. He's looking at the brush, trying to think about whether or not he can run away. Okay, and then George, again, his atmosphere changes, his mood changes. He becomes quite cold, and he becomes threatening. So he threatens Lenny with violence. So that mood and atmosphere changes throughout. Okay, so you could talk about, even in terms of character, the way that characters change through the extract, but also, you know, as we've had an advantage here and we've been able to look at the mood and atmosphere, you can also recognise how mood and atmosphere changes in line with the characters' reactions. Okay, so the way the characters react and the way the characters speak affects mood and atmosphere, but also relationships and characters. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into how to respond to a mood and atmosphere question. The main thing is that you're focusing on responding to the question. So if you were to respond to a mood and atmosphere question here, you would say, firstly, Steinbeck writes, and then you would pick your quotation, which suggests a mood of or an atmosphere of. Okay, so you always need to make sure that you're focusing on the question that's being asked by the exam board, because otherwise, you know, you can get tangled up in responding to a question that they haven't asked, and that's where, you know, people tend to lose their marks. Okay, so I think, you know, that's everything really. So hopefully by the end of this now, you'll have understood what skills are required to respond to an extract question. Okay, you'll have understood the mark scheme for the extract question, and you'll be able to use a structure to respond to an extract question. So I've given you an example of the structure that I use with my students. Miss Davis, are there any questions that have come up? Because I think, I'm just about coming to an end there. So are there any other questions that have come up?
No, we've had nothing raised, Mrs. Thomas, at all.
Okay, right. So, okay, so next week's session, we are going to focus on the essay question for Unit 1 and Unit 2. Okay, again, I'll be talking about structures, and I'll be talking about, the different types of essays that can come up. So theme essays on themes and essays on characters. Again, as I said at the beginning, these sessions are all recorded and you'll be able to access them again. Okay, and just thank everyone who has attended. As I say, we'll hang on for a few more moments, make sure that there were no questions, but feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A section. Okay, thank you very much for attending, and I'll see you next week.